Hello and welcome to our webinar, Can We Fix Productivity with Better Time Management? I'm Georgina from eDays. For those of you who may not be familiar with who we are, eDays is a leading provider of absence, leave and time management software, serving hundreds of organisations around the world. This webinar today actually coincides with the launch of our new time tracking software, which provides clock in and clock out functionality, as well as an online timesheet and reporting system. This is something that we've developed to help organisations address productivity and efficiency in their business. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the UK's productivity levels have remained consistently low ever since the global financial crisis in 2008 and have lagged behind the likes of France and Germany since the 1990s. So in today's session, we're asking if better time management across all levels of the workplace boosts productivity. We are delighted to be joined today by two expert speakers on the topic, digital productivity specialist and tech founder at DigiEnable, Liz Hardwick, and Richard Maybury, managing consultant at Attitude Solutions, Proven Productivity. My colleague from eDays, Jenny, also joins us today, and she will be hosting the main portion of this session. Just over to the introductions then, Liz, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself briefly.
Brilliant. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having us. I'm a tech founder of a few different businesses. I've got a software as a service, marketing and lead generation platform. But primarily today, I'm here with my DigiEnable hat on, which is digital training, and productivityclub.co.uk, which helps organisations, individuals, teams and their leaders with digital productivity. So how to use digital tools to increase productivity without getting distracted by shiny objects. So looking forward to having a really good discussion today.
Perfect. Thank you, Liz. Richard, I'll ask the same of you.
Hi, hello, everybody. I'm Richard Maybury, known as Mr. Productivity to many of my clients. And since the year 2000, I've been equipping and enabling my clients' people to measurably deliver their results easier every day. And we do that through welding good practice behaviors around prioritization, collaboration, and workload management to the Microsoft productivity environment. Started out as just Outlook, morphed into Outlook and Teams, and now, of course, for the past good few years, is how to maximize productivity collectively within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Great to have you both with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will last for about 45 minutes. The chat will remain open, so please do send us your thoughts or questions. We'll keep an eye on this and respond to any as we go. This webinar will be recorded and the on-demand version will be emailed to you afterwards. We will also send these slides across to you, and we've put together a crib sheet at the end of them with top tips for improving productivity in the workplace, which you'll also be able to download once this webinar has ended. And now I'll hand over to Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, Georgina, and hi, everyone. Great to have you here today. eDays is all about creating happier, healthier, and more productive workforce, but we know it's not always that simple. We've got a few stats on the screen at the minute, which I won't go through individually, but because obviously you'll receive the slides afterwards, but we can see there's a few challenges surrounding productivity. So we'll come to the audience first. If everyone wants to pop in the chat what they think the biggest challenge surrounding productivity right now is, and we might delve into a couple of them very shortly. But first, I'll come to you, Richard. What do you think is the biggest challenge in productivity right now?
So I'll start by using a caveat, and that caveat is it all depends what you mean by productivity. So the challenge is that productivity on a macro level, at government level, has got about 10 different definitions, and productivity at an operational level has probably got about 10,000 different definitions. The truth is that we've got a conundrum, because the ruthless reality is that most people with a half decent job have got a job and a half to do every day. And even if they haven't, they feel as though they have. So it's not that people are not working. And even though the national figures will show that output, GDP per person, is in decline, most people who've got a decent job or a half decent job have got a job and a half to do. So it all depends on how you measure productivity. And probably the biggest challenge that we are facing at the moment is this flexible, uncertain environment that we have at the moment, where we're sort of working hybridly, and we are relying more and more on technology. And there is a fine dividing line between personal autonomy and collaborative requirements. And I think that's the real big issue for business leaders at the moment. How do we culturalize our technology so that everyone can have some degree of autonomy, but also operate within the collaborative constraints of the necessary technology that they have at their fingertips?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, like with you saying about technology and about hybrid working and things like that, what kind of impact do you think that has, Liz?
Big one for me that I see day in, day out with the teams and the business leaders I work with is the hybrid, the remote, the confusion over when is Sandra in the office next, where we're defaulting, because there's so much technology, we're defaulting to emails because actually it's easier and it's quicker, and we're all using the same tools. We default to things we've used for a long time rather than maybe the Slack channels or the MS Team 365 softwares that we have at our disposal. We generally find that there's lack of communication within the teams. So I help a lot of people figure out how to better use simple things like calendars. But that's the tool. But I think one of the issues is the lack of communication. So post-pandemic, I know you've got a stat on the screen there. I think we're still seeing impacts of the pandemic, because some organisations said, yes, go completely remotely. Now we're trying to figure out the best balance for business and individuals. But we need to have that clarity on who's where and when. A big example I see all the time is there'll be an in-person meeting in an office, and the PA or EA is arranging food and refreshments for people. They have no idea really of how many people are going to be virtual in that meeting or in person. So there's a lot of that lack of clarity that I think is helping some of these sort of issues be even worse than traditionally they might have been in a more remote first scenario.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. And I think, the flexible and hybrid world that we now work in, it's had such an impact for so many positive reasons in terms of well-being and reducing the commute and things like that. But we're also seeing that flexible working in terms of the time that people work is maybe leading to a bit of a blur in work-life balance. People are potentially doing unlogged overtime in the evenings that's not being seen and things like that. Do you think there's this kind of unseen impact happening as a result of hybrid and flexible working? Is that something that needs addressing in a more visible way?
There's certainly challenges around how people are choosing to invest their time during a working day. We're still in a very, very, very much in a state of flex. Some of our big clients have got mandated days in the office now, or mandated number of days in the office. Some are still trying to work with inducements to encourage people back into the office. The reality, I think, from speaking with lots of people about this, is that people have got this idea that they can flex their time, and they can, and it's wonderful. And indeed, that's going to be written into law, or if it hasn't already been written into law now. people flex as much as they want to, and that can cause people to be operating legitimately these days at 10 o'clock at night, because they've put the kids to bed, they've done what they have to do, and they're just wrapping up on their emails for the day. So I think it's more a question of people choosing to do that than it is a question of people feeling they have to do that. So I think there's a sort of a growing integration of our normal day-to-day lives and our business hour lives. And I think that's flexing. Whether or not that's increasing the number of minutes that people work over and above their mandated hours in a day, I'm not sure. I haven't got data on that, but people are certainly feeling that they're empowered to start work at 7, feed the kids, get back onto the computer at 8:30, 9 o'clock after the school run. And that's wonderful, in my view.
Yeah, I think it's a really positive thing, like you say, for so many reasons. But, you know, potentially there's this juggling act as well, like you're saying, with people having childcare and other responsibilities that could potentially be leading to other issues like burnout, which we know is a big factor in terms of productivity. Liz, what do you think about the relationship between burnout and productivity? I mean, we can see a couple of people in the chat actually saying that, you know, their main challenges are juggling lots of things and lots of deadlines. Do you think people are feeling that pressure?
Oh, absolutely. I've been there, done that with the burnout. I think I'd been running my own business 5 years and you know, hit that brick wall. So I absolutely have you know, working knowledge of how that feels, and just the sheer overwhelm. And I think sometimes the simplest of tasks become really hard. And I think if you are the worker and you've got a line manager and they aren't seeing that, I think that can be an issue when you're working remotely or hybrid. So I think there is an element of not checking up on people, but you know, almost like a welfare check for people to see if they are doing okay. I think the I would say from the examples I've seen and the research I've read, people are more productive when they have the ability to be flexible. They actually do give more hours than their contracted or indeed you know, tracked hours as well. Oh, I'll just answer this email now and it might take 20 minutes, and that isn't necessarily something that, you know, would have been traditionally tracked. It does make it easier when there's, you know, a software system to quickly enable us to do that. And I think it's those pockets of time where we think, well, I'll just do this, where your brain is switching between work mode and personal mode. You know, you mentioned before about the blurred lines, and I think sometimes it is about having a cutoff or a fixed schedule of this is the times that I am going to work, and try and avoid those. Oh, well, I'll just do that quickly while it's in my head. So for me, I work a lot with people who are continuously sat in their inbox, or they've got their notifications permanently on their phone, because I think that increases burnout, because we're being continuously reminded of all these work things we need to do. And sometimes then life can become the thing that falls by the wayside because the work has always taken priority. You know, my example of that is you would never not turn up to an appointment with your boss or a client. But then when we make appointments for ourselves or our personal scenarios or even self-care, that ends up dropping off and we prioritize the work. So I think the burnout piece is a lot of different factors, but those are the things that come to mind in terms of things that we can instantly be aware of and maybe start to take those small steps to rectifying. Because when you're in burnout, even the simplest thing as prioritizing what do I need to do first can be a big struggle. So, you know, understand that from personal experience.
Yeah, and you know what, you're dead right there. You know, and there's stressed people don't think. Right, that's a factor of life. That's the way our neurology works. When you're in stress, you don't think. You don't think logically. You're just in that moment. And I think there's two things for business leaders to sort of get their heads around here. The first is about their sort of leadership role in it. So I encourage, I've got to be careful what I say, but I encourage business leaders to not consider how are you as a rhetorical question. I mean, it never should have been a rhetorical question, but it has been. And in a hybrid world where very often a worker would not see their line manager in real life for weeks on end, it cannot be a rhetorical question. And we must make time for that how are you type of conversation outside of follow-ups and formal meetings and everything else. We do need to nurture that. So how are you should never be a rhetorical question in a flexible first working environment. And the second thing is, goes back to what was being said earlier on, and that's about all of these stimuli coming in at us. And obviously we've got to control all that, and we turn off alarms and bells and whistles and alerts. And I think that when people are working at home, and in fact, I know this, when people are working at home, when everyone was forced to work at home, as opposed to the road warriors who were used to working at home, pre-COVID, salespeople, engineers, lots of customer-facing people were out there seeing customers, and the other people were working in offices or factories or warehouses. With COVID, everyone had to work from home initially, and those people hadn't been inducted into the ruthless realities of working from home. So time flexed for them, not necessarily in a good way. And I think that one of the things that people need to be constantly aware of, because there are distractions, work distractions and personal life distractions when you're working from home. One of the things that we have to be aware of and help people through is the fact that the only thing they can manage in life really is where they choose to put their focus and energy moment to moment. Everything else is outside of our control. So it's that ability to manage our focus and our energy and know what needs to be done to be productive, and getting rid of all the other extraneous impetus whilst we do that. And at the same time, making sure that everybody in our team knows that. So using presence formulas in Microsoft Teams, for example. And I know that in the Microsoft Teams Outlook calendar, very soon you'll be able to see who is where, not whether they're in the office or not, but who is actually where, which is going to be very cool. But it is going to be about, for me, it's, how are you is no longer a rhetorical question for leaders, and enabling people to manage focus and energy more effectively, which is fundamentally what we do, with the people who are in this hybrid world, so that they're making good decisions moment by moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you say, it's about you look after your people, you help them look after themselves, and then they look after their workload and their schedule and things like that. Yes. Time management is so important, and it's obviously the kind of main theme of today's session, because it's just such a big part of it. I think I've read a stat before, which is like admin and other like kind of busy work tasks take up like they're the main time suck on someone's day. We've got a few more stats actually on the next slide, which is like that they unclock unpaid overtime and things like that. So it's this whole kind of time management piece of where is that time going, and is it on productive work that has meeting deadlines and that's going towards the overall purpose of what that person is doing, or is there a lot of wasted time somewhere? There's the kind of joke about, the meeting that could have been an email and things like that. Liz, how important do you think time management is, and how much do we see actually being wasted there that could be maybe more productive?
I think the word productivity has morphed over the years, because I think we are at the nugget of it still talking about time management, because I talk about reclaiming time, energy and focus. And really, if you've not got the time piece done, you're going to struggle with the energy and you're going to struggle with the focus. For me, the time piece and the kind of the tip around that is, very much so for the past sort of 7 to 8 years, I've been using the Pomodoro process, which is working in 25-minute chunks of time, putting a timer on and working and trying to single focus. And I know for some people on this session today, they're like, yeah, well, that's never going to happen. They've got the can you justs of the world, because you might be, a people facing scenario. So actually your time is very much firefighting and helping others as and when they need support. In the HR world, that is something that you can't really predict what your working tasks are for the day. You can have a bit of a plan, but that firefighting piece needs to come in there. So for me, time management is all about utilizing your schedule, blocking things out, having that clarity of when people can contact you, do not disturb sessions, and actually it being in the calendar. And, yes, you can use lots of Microsoft tools to automate a bit of that process as well. But having that time clearly marked out, I'm available for calls, I'm available to be contacted at this particular chunk of time, because I think because of the immediacy of being able to contact each other, so either we're sitting in our email inbox or we have those pop-ups pop up on our screen when we're during our working day, I think we can reduce our focus very quickly. I mean, there's a stat out there that says every time a pop-up pops up, it takes us 16 minutes to refocus back on the task in hand. So if you can imagine, we've got all these pop-ups every day, the focus isn't necessarily there to start off with. So how we do the time management piece becomes even harder. So for me, Pomodoro process, that's what enables me. I have the luxury to work for myself in my own businesses. I do a 5-day working week in 4 because I've managed my time using that process. And there's loads of different, tools and productivity resources out there. That one's from 1980s. I'm adding onto that and using digital productivity as the thing that I support my clients with. So utilizing the tools to make that happen. But really, we're still thinking about how much focus do you really have in a day? Deep work, Carl Newport talks about we only have 4 hours worth of quality working time in our day. So going back to what you just said about, admin tasks, Jenny, if we've zapped 4 hours of our day already by doing the admin-based bits of our jobs, then we're going to struggle to do anything else with focus. So I think there's Pomodoro, absolutely. If people have never heard of that, go check that out. That is my go-to thing. If I'm struggling and I'm overwhelmed, I will put my timer on and I'll do 25 minutes of one thing, and that really helps me get back into the flow or the zone of actually being able to do stuff. And I think that's a helpful time management technique that is from yesteryear, really.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And like you say, it's all about kind of finding a system or a process that works for you. When we're talking about, I guess, people managers and HR leaders and things, though, when they're looking at implementing things on like a wider scale, filtering it down through a business, we can see that employees waste 360 hours a year searching for information that they need. That sounds mind-blowing to me. Richard, what do you think about, we've mentioned a few tools already, but how important do you think it is that employees and leaders have access to the right, information, tools, knowledge, that kind of thing, in order to do their role and be productive in it?
Massively important. So, as I said early on in our conversation here, there is a tension that has to be addressed, which is the tension between personal autonomy and collaborative constraint. Now, all tools are arguably good tools, but it's what we don't need and what we don't want is to have isolated islands of excellence in a sea of confusion. So if we're looking at bringing a team together, whether that's a small team or a large corporation, I work in both environments. What we need to do is not just throw the tools at the people and allow them to understand it for themselves and to find their way. And by the way, most people who are employed are normal people. So they're not superstars, they're normal people, and normal people are driven by habit that they've actually picked up. So for example, many people who've been using Outlook for a number of years haven't changed the way they use Outlook. They haven't changed their email management approach since they first got an email account. And so you get environments where organizations are moving more and more towards teams for collaborative working and for meeting and what have you. And yet there are some people who still insist, and they're great people. They're hardworking people looking after themselves and their families, but they insist on sending an email to everybody with attachments because that's what works for them. And they might be superstars in terms of, being productive, but the impact that that has on the overall team and the overall business can be quite negative because there's another email from that person who doesn't understand how we're trying to do stuff here. So I think the tools, and you guys have got great tools. The tools are okay in themselves, and every tool is useful in itself. But the challenge is, how do we as business leaders implement tools that will support our culture and support our objectives in driving things forward and navigate this tension between personal autonomy, I do it my way, and how do we do it together? So one of my welding purpose to priorities principle 10 is moving from me to we. And that's where I bring in my culturalizing technology thing. So it's how will we use this? So how do we make sure that everybody knows when we're available? How do we make sure that when we've signaled deep work, Cal Newport, by the way, if you haven't read his book, go and read it. It's absolutely amazing. How do we make sure that when we choose to be in deep work, everybody understands that we can be available, but it better be good and it better be important, because this colleague is indicating deep work in every area of the environment, say within 365. Every area of the environment that people go and see, what's Richard Maybury doing? He's in deep work. I'll take it upon myself to get back to him later. Yeah, as opposed to I'll fire him an email, or I'll fire him a text message, or I'll fire him a Teams chat, so that then the bullet is either in his back or he's put it into into his own usage. So it's culturalizing this stuff that is the challenge, because every tool by itself can be good, but when we're working together, we have to culturalize it. So some of the great companies I'm working with, for example, and they will have Microsoft 365 implementation leads who help the team members to sort of move away from the way they did email and communications internally before, to the point where they feel comfortable with moving away from it. Some people have to be moved screaming and kicking to come away from using email for internal. I know firms who've stopped allowing their people to send internal emails and direct them towards Teams, for example. That's a hard case. That's a hard stop. But if we culturalize, if we help the implementation of technologies, whether that's a Salesforce.com implementation or a Microsoft 365 full integration or some other sort of applications, if we help people to adopt the processes, they help define and culturalize how we'll do it together. That's so much better than having isolated islands of excellence who happen to know a little bit about, or a lot about a little bit, in my view.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like you say, it's not just giving people the access to tools, it's about giving them the training and the proper professional development and kind of ensuring that everyone's on the same page.
And helping them as well, and helping them to sort of allowing them to to mold the usage of the tools and to set that sort of context of how we use it here. So when people come in to a business or into a team, there's already an agreed way. This is how we decide if we're going to have an email or a Teams meeting. This is how we decide how we will accept somebody's priority or trump somebody's priority. This is how we do it here, which is, as I said, that's what culture is. how we do it here.
100%. And Liz, what do you think about that? I mean, we've got a few things on the screen right now, a lot of which we've already touched upon in terms of what can hinder productivity in the workplace. But when we're looking at the solution to these hindrances and the kind of how we tackle productivity, there's a bit of a question mark over whether that kind of obligation lies with at an individual level. Like, do we need to individually empower people to be more productive, or do we need to implement things at a kind of company level? And obviously, like Richard's just said, there's some good arguments for kind of bringing the two together there. What are your thoughts on that, Liz?
I think I've seen it work well with larger organisations where there's actually a user group. So, having a group of people at different levels in this stakeholder process to be able to say, right, let's test a few things. It's not necessarily the latest thing on the market. It might be something that there's a stat that says we only use 34% of the features in any one program. So actually, a lot of the time, there might be something that you've already got in your tech arsenal, if you will, that could be useful if you knew the features that were available within it. So, if you've not looked at a particular tool that you've been using for a long time, chances are, there's been lots of updates and things. So I would always suggest if you can get an advisor that's technology agnostic, so we have like a digital friend service, give us a list of features that you'd like something to do, and then we can suggest something off the back of that. But buy-in from the people who are actually going to use it is really important, because yes, you could offer them training, but what's even better is if you can get a user group or a representation of a few different people who are going to use that system day in, day out, and they're like, this isn't fit for purpose. I've got a big passion about disability accessibility within technology as well. There's a lot of tools out there that aren't fit for purpose for an accessibility side of things. So if we haven't had a group of users test some of these things out first, we don't know whether it's actually fit for purpose for the individuals, but also for the organization as well. So if we can have a group of different levels within an organization, or even just departments, different departments have to have a word in that as well? It will be so much easier to roll something out if you've had buy-in at the initial choosing the software stage, because everyone is going to then become that advocate. Be like, oh, it's dead simple, it's really easy, I can help you do that. Having some people along that way that are going to be, like Richard said, the advocates of that particular software. If you've got the buy-in at that starter stage, it's so much easier to then roll something out. I saw a large council during the pandemic decide they were going to go and roll out a 365 online automation with zero support, zero, comms as well, because we were also in the pandemic by that point. They could have decided to not do that, but because they had targets, they were less thinking about the people involved and more thinking about, yes, we need to roll this out now. And actually, that was very detrimental, to the point where Richard mentioned before, sending links rather than attachments. They couldn't do that. They sent me a PDF and I'm like, this PDF was corrupt. You're going to have to send me something else. So, I think we've learned a lot from the pandemic and those scenarios. I would absolutely say get a user group together and ask them to go research what they think might be relevant, because they might have some solutions already, because everyone has different hats as well. We're not just here with our work hat on. We might work for a charity in our spare time that actually has a good tool that they're using that's a great resource for them. So we don't know where everyone else is coming from background wise as well. So that can sometimes help with those sorts of user groups as well.
Yeah.
And
I think that's so important. It's so important. We all probably know that big implementations tend to sort of cost an awful lot more than they thought it would cost and take longer than they thought it would take. And one of the biggest CRM sort of giants out there is Salesforce.com, and we've trained people in Salesforce.com, but even they would say that most implementations of Salesforce, which is a great tool, most implementations of Salesforce.com come in over time and over budget. And it's because people feel as though there's now an extra layer of admin that I've got to do my job. You know, I was doing it okay before Salesforce was implemented, for example. And again, you know, people pull their hair out, what little hair they have left. People pull their hair out because the implementation is harder because they haven't brought in people's sort of minds and hearts. They've brought in the minds, maybe not the hearts. And I've seen some where the implementation is slow in take up and what have you, and the business eventually says, if it's not in Salesforce, you don't get your bonus. And then that's the driver for change. But it could have been short-circuited, and you know, by bringing people along in and having user groups, having sort of having advocates, having sort of onboarding sort of support, and even within the software. And again, you know, eDays has got some cool offerings. If people aren't shown exactly how it can be of use to them, then it just becomes another tool. And it just becomes something else they have to do, as opposed to, you know, helping them to do it easier and better. And we sort of in our sort of welding purpose to priorities programs, for example, we would sort of get people to sit down and think, okay, so we've learned all this stuff about sort of managing Outlook emails better. Let's see if we could define a charter. It might not ever happen, but what would good look like with all of these features within Outlook that we never even knew existed, and now we know how we can use them better together? What would we say would be a good agreement to have? And it's amazing. People come up with the most amazing sort of lists of agreements. Wouldn't it be good if, you know, and that's got nothing to do with us. It's got everything to do with what they want to do, because they're now thinking about it with the knowledge of the full scope of what's available to them. So we got companies who've got email charters, and when people come into the business, you know, their first day, they've got their new shiny laptop, they've got their new shiny phone, and they got their sort of inducted. And part of the induction is, by the way, this is how we do email here.
Yeah, I think it sounds like, you know, the main important thing then is not only getting buy-in from people, but obviously that two-way communication, finding out from your people what would help them, and then you can give them the tools and the knowledge and everything else. I mean, it's that visibility, isn't it? It's that open channel of communication, and eDays is all about visibility. I mean, if we look at the challenges on screen, burnout, health, you know, disengagement, all of those challenges can be addressed by understanding exactly what's going on in your organization, which is just so important. I mean, we're getting close to being out of time, so I've just got time to come to probably both of you for your like number one top tip on productivity. So if anyone could take just one main thing from each of you from today's session, what would that be? Let's go to you first, Richard.
Okay, I think it's about understanding that the only thing that we can truly manage is where we choose to put our focus and our energy moment to moment, and to figure out ways to manage focus and energy. And part of that, I would say, just two elements around that. Certainly within the Microsoft environment, you have the ability, usually in the file tab, behind the file tab, you have the ability to turn off every single alarm, bell, whistle that just gets in the way. So turn off all automated alarms, bells, and whistles in Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Teams, and then choose to have which ones you want to be alerted to based upon your priorities. And the second thing I would say around that is, if it's not in your calendar, then it's not going to happen. And by the way, you need to put everything in your calendar, because your colleagues are looking at your calendar more than they're looking at you these days in a hybrid world. So they need to know between your calendar block out time and your status in Microsoft Teams, top right-hand corner. They need to know where you are and whether you're really available to them or not. So bells, alarms, whistles off, calendar on and status elements within calendar available to everybody so they can see exactly where you are and what you're working on.
Perfect. Thanks, Richard. And what about you, Liz? What would your key takeaway for people be from today's session?
So I echo the scheduling piece, making sure you've blocked out enough time for each task. So I would add on to that the Pomodoro process. So there's a tool called TimePie. It used to be called Pomodone. It's recently changed its name. It's a simple timer that can also integrate with your calendar, so it can track what you've actually spent your time doing. So that goes really nicely with the time tracking pieces that you offer as well. And I think it's try and focus on one thing at a time. Try not to multitask. Try and think, right, this next 25 minutes, I'm going to spend doing my emails or working on this project. And that single focused piece will really help you just go, I'm just going to do one thing. And if you're getting confused about what that one thing is, either type it in a notepad or a post-it note and a pen and just go, right, I'm going to spend 25 minutes on this one thing right now. And when you get distracted down the rabbit hole, look back at that post-it note and say, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. And try and refocus on the task in hand.
Amazing. Thanks, Liz. So focus and time management is what we're taking from this, I think. Amazing. Well, I'll briefly hand back to Georgina then just to wrap up today's session and pop that there.
Thank you, everyone. That was a great discussion. Thanks in particular to our two great speakers, Richard and Liz. If you'd like to learn more about the training and services provided by Richard at Attitude Solutions Proven Productivity, check out richardmaybury.co.uk, and likewise specialist training and services from Liz at productivityclub.co.uk. We hope you all enjoyed today's session. As I said at the beginning, this webinar will be sent to you via email. We'll also send the slides across to you and the top tips crib sheets, which we hope you'll find useful. If you'd like to learn more about eDays and discover our new time tracking software, please do visit our website, e-days.com, where you can book a free personalised demo. Thanks to everyone for joining today, and we hope to see you again in a future webinar.